Welcome to Chasing Zero, an Ozinga safety podcast, where safety isn't just a priority, it's our mission. Each episode we explore the real stories, strategies, and innovations driving us toward one powerful goal: zero incidents and zero injuries. Because when it comes to safety, we're not keeping secrets or settling for less. We are chasing zero. Today's guest is James Kornas, Executive Vice President of Ozinga Rail. James has held a passion for America's railroads from an early age. Prior to joining Ozinga in 2024, his previous roles with Fortune 500 companies like General Motors and Norfolk Southern have bolstered his leadership in transportation and manufacturing, giving him a wealth of knowledge on both the customer and carrier sides of the equation. Today, James walks us through the lingo and logistics of railroad safety and the evolution of this nearly 200-year industry. Here's Ozinga Health and Safety Vice President, Adam Pummer.
Welcome everybody to Chasing Zero. I've got a great guest today. As always, our goal is to chase zero incidents and zero injuries. We're always learning new stuff. I'm Adam Pummer, your host, and I've got a cool guest today in the rail world, which is James Kornas, Executive Vice President of Rail here at Ozinga. The rail industry has always been super fascinating to me.
Sure.
And a lot of times most people think of rail of, well, I just got to wait at a train stop when they're crossing and they get annoyed by it. But the more you look into it and the more I'm learning about it, it is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
So welcome. Give me a little background. How'd you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, no, hey, look, really appreciate it, Adam. Thanks for having me out here as a guest. It's great to talk a little bit about rail safety and how that plays into the business that we have here at Ozinga, but more broadly, for anybody that has rail out there at their industries or that they may interface with rail as part of their daily work. My background, been in the industry for almost 17 years now. And I've been very fortunate being able to have the ability to work across several size companies on both the carrier and customer side of rail logistics. So I've been able to see it from a very broad lens. So talk about your Fortune 500 companies. I've also been able to see it from a smaller lens in the short line railroad industry. And then now with Ozinga, my second time being on the customer side of rail. So it's been a unique perspective across an almost 20-year career. An interesting way of gotten involved in it. I have always loved and had a passion for trains ever since I was a little kid. I can't remember not enjoying it. But I never really considered a career in it, to be honest with you. In fact, out of college, I went to work for General Motors as a third generation GM engineer. And I was fortunate enough to have a friend of mine who came to me one day and it hit me like a ton of bricks when he says, I'm just surprised as much as you love the railroad industry. Why have you never gone to work for them?
Yeah.
And that was a turning point, quite honestly. So
how old were you then?
I was 26, as a matter of fact. So I was been out of college.
So you're working at GM, right
3
out
years.
of college. Mm-hmm. You're a Purdue grad, right?
Purdue grad, go Boilermakers. We're not entirely thrilled about what IU's doing right now, but a national championship.
You got to be happy about that.
Yeah, if it's a Big Ten and it's not Michigan or Ohio State, then yeah, that's probably all right. Yeah, we'll take it.
So you went from Purdue straight to GM.
Correct.
And what were you doing there?
Manufacturing engineering. So we were doing new vehicle launches, and so I know we'll get into a lot of these aspects in the podcast itself, but heavily automated robots, single spot welding, people interfacing with sheet metal and loading it into production lines and things like that. So talk about a heightened sense of safety and what it takes to make an automobile. So I was really exposed into the industry in manufacturing engineering, very tangible things at very young age in my career, and it was interesting to get the perspective of safety as a young gunning, 20 some odd year old kid coming out of college, and then evolving to where I am at now, almost 46 years old, and what I've seen and how the industry that we interface with, manufacturing, production, real, hard assets, things you can touch and feel, how that has evolved from a safety aspect in this period of time.
Yeah. So you're at GM, and how long are you with them?
Only for about 3 years. So age 23, 2003 to 06. And then that's, like I said, I came home from a trip. I was working in General Motors manufacturing down in Slough, Mexico. And I came back from a trip, normal 30 days down there, a couple of days home before I went back. A childhood friend of mine's, was sitting there talking, and he says, "How you liking things?" And I say, "It's fine. Third generation Kornas working for GM. Life's good."
In Mexico.
In Mexico, yeah, that was in and of itself fascinating. 2.5 years that I spent with GM was in Mexico. Mm-hmm.
Was that different than here?
Oh yeah, remarkably so. So heavily labor intensive, not as much automation in your manufacturing. Level of safety, as again, I know we're going to get into a lot of these aspects, but the safety is just not prevalent down there.
In Mexico?
Oh gosh, yeah, no. I mean, within the plant grounds at General Motors, it's there, right? They have a phenomenal safety culture and everything like that, but, at least from what I remember, 20 some years ago. But in terms of the way that they approach highway safety, vehicular safety, pedestrian safety, even railroad safety. I know we're going to talk about it. There's a rail line that bisected a major highway that we had to cross every day when we went into work. And there were times that the crossing gates didn't function when trains would go through.
Oh, geez, that takes you back now.
Oh, yeah.
So you're in Mexico, and I'd love to, we could probably do a whole podcast on that.
Oh, yeah.
And then you come home and you get introduced into rail again.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, this is a unique story as well. I actually, I went to my dad, who, was very fortunate to have a great career in the executive level of General Motors. And I came to him, I said, hey, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I kind of like trains more than I like cars, and I'd love to look at a career change. And my folks' family has always been really supportive, right? So
yeah.
my dad dove right into it, said, absolutely. There's other great careers out there. The railroad is certainly one of them. Why don't we take a look at how we can get you, positioned to interview with the railroad? So we put together, I'll never forget this, we put together 25 individual cover letters and resumes, and we sent them to the top 5 executives at 5 of the major Class 1 railroads. There were 7 Class 1 railroads at the time, so we sent them to 5 of the 7. And this is a true story. I got ding letters back from all but one. And the one that actually was interested in me was Wick Moorman, who was the chairman and CEO of Norfolk Southern Railroad at the time. He passed my resume and cover letter on to his executive assistant, who got a hold of me and said, hey, Mr. Moorman, got your resume, got your cover letter, seemed interested. We'd like to consider you for the brand new management training program that we're starting in January of 2006. Would you be interested? So
where was that?
So it was a lot of places, as a matter of fact. It was, you were allowed to stay in the location that you lived in currently. So for me, that was Royal Oak, Michigan. And then the predominance of the travel was across the Norfolk Southern system. There were major training centers in McDonough, Georgia, Norfolk, Virginia. And then what they did afterwards is they would put you out to various field assignments for various disciplines in the railroad. So they would give you an 8-week training assignment with the mechanical department, maybe out of Toledo, Ohio, right? And you'd spend 8 weeks with the mechanical department learning rail infrastructure, track, geometry, all this sorts of stuff associated with it. And then, then they do pull you out of that and they put you for 12 weeks in the locomotive shop in a major terminal, Bellevue or, Conway, Pennsylvania, or Elkhart, Indiana. And you'd do 12 weeks shadowing a mechanical supervisor, and you'd learn all aspects of changing power assemblies on locomotives, traction motors, auxiliary generators, that type of stuff. And so you really got to learn the railroad from the ground up.
Wow. That's a great program.
Oh, it's fantastic. I tell everybody I knew what everybody did at Norfolk Southern, from the janitor to the CEO, in that period of time. And it was an 18-month program. But because I already had a lot of rail knowledge that I had just accumulated through my own interest in the industry, I transitioned out, and after about 9 months, they pulled me out and said, "Look, we're not. You already know all this stuff. We're gonna give you a full assignment." And so my very first railroad job coming out of the training program was I was assigned as a assistant train master at Oakwood Yard in Melvindale, Michigan, working nights from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. with Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday off.
Really?
That was my first assignment.
Did you like that?
At 26 years old, it wasn't great, right?
Yeah.
for obvious reasons. But I'll be honest with you, Adam.
Nobody wants to go out and have a couple beers on a Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah, at 7 in the morning when you get off work. No, it's weird. They don't do that. No, I'll tell you, I really liked it. And here's the reason why I liked it is at night, you have the autonomy to run the railroad a lot differently than you do during the day. Because as you probably imagine, right, all of your senior managers, your executives, they're all in bed asleep, right?
Right.
And what it teaches you at a very young age is to make decisions.
Figure it out.
Figure it out. And they always say, pick up the phone and call if you run into a problem.
Nobody's going to answer that call.
Nobody's going to answer. You never want to make that call, right? Yeah. So you become very adept very quickly at making critical decisions that are value-based, that are fact-based, and that are best for the company, right? And if you do that well enough, you get the feedback loop the next day when your a terminal superintendent comes in and wants the morning report, right, and what you did the night before. So I think that's very divisive in that regard. Plus, the other thing about working at night is fundamentally humans in their circadian rhythm is not the same working on nights. So nights can have a lot of its own challenges for all of the obvious reasons, right? If anybody's ever out at night walking or driving, you have limited sight distances. Your spatial differentiation is completely different at night versus day. You have fatigue issues you have to deal with.
It's dark.
Yeah, it's dark. So it gives you a heightened sense of awareness, and it really kind of sharpens your toolbox probably a little bit more. So I was fortunate to have the opportunity to do that.
So you were assistant superintendent.
Assistant train master.
Assistant train master.
Train
That's
master.
a cool title.
Right.
So what does that look like? What do you do when you're a train master?
Really, the train master is responsible for running all the operations, either at a field position on a division, or they're responsible for an in-terminal train operations. So if you can recall back into the mid-2000s before the financial crisis there in '08, being outside of Detroit, heavily automotive, a lot of very time-sensitive traffic ran through there, automotive parts, automotive frames, finished vehicles. So it was really a flagship terminal in Norfolk Southern system. And if I remember correctly, on nights, I think we departed at least 3 Triple Crown trains. We also departed no less than, I think, 6 manifest train symbols, and a number of Canadian Pacific run-through trains. And so it was a very active location. And so you were responsible for managing all of the train and engine personnel that were coming on duty, local assignments that were switching various industries inside the terminal. So we had Marathon, we had Chrysler Tri-Level Dock, we had the DRDC, which was a huge, was called the Detroit Regional Distribution Center. It was all auto parts. So you managed the yard masters, you had to manage your train dispatchers, you had to manage your ground personnel, and you had to interact with your mechanical personnel and your engineering personnel and your signal personnel. So really, it was running your own business.
It's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. I mean, it's hundreds of people. By the time you go past the regular assignment, trainmen and enginemen to the extra boards, trying to fill slots for vacancies. People go on vacation. People call off sick. It is truly operations management, to the nth degree.
Yeah. So how long were you with them?
So I was with Norfolk Southern from '06 to '08, and an interesting story on that transition. Very simply, the Norfolk Southern's primary interchange partner in Melvindale, Michigan, was the Canadian National Railroad. Took place at a location called OJ. We called it Oakwood Junction, and there were 2 interchange tracks. And late at night, I was bored. I was rummaging around the manifest yard office, we called it, and I found an old legal box with an agreement that dated back to the early 1900s. I believe it was like 1916, 1912, something like that. And it was actually an agreement between the then Wabash Railroad and the then DT&I Railroad, Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton Railroad, that allowed each railroad to enter each other's rail yards for the purpose of interchanging traffic, as opposed to moving those cars out onto what we called the interchange tracks, which were limited in capacity. They only held 33 cars apiece. And with all the automotive traffic going between the 2 railroads, it was one of the primary reasons you had to stay on top of your operations because all this time-sensitive traffic was moving. So I called up our manager of joint facilities at Norfolk Southern, and I asked him, I said, hey, is this agreement, do you think this is still in effect? I mean, it's 100 years old, but I mean, do you think it's in effect? He did some research, got back to me, said, yeah, I don't see anything to the contrary. Let's get a hold of Canadian National and ask him. So they got a hold of Canadian National. They implemented the agreement, and it didn't take but probably 2 weeks before I got a call from Canadian National's local general manager saying, what would it take to get you to come from Norfolk?
How did you find this?
Yeah.
That is wild. I think that's probably one of the most fascinating things about the rail for me is how old it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's
sure.
So, I mean, I think you were telling me the other day, it's from the 1800s, right? 200.
It's almost, we're coming up on what America would recognize as the 200th anniversary of the railroads in the United States. So in 2027, a lot of people recognize that 1827, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was the first railroad incorporated in as a company in the United States of America. So,
1827.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Holy moly.
Yeah. Talk about change.
Yeah, but think about the technology back then I mean, it still fascinates me now. I'm watching these train cars go by, and I'm like, how is that one locomotive moving all that weight? You know the numbers on how much does a rail car weigh? Yeah,
so a rail car empty typically weighs about 55,000 pounds. So call it about
empty.
25 tons roughly.
One car.
But it'll hold about another 230,000 pounds loaded. So you're talking 105 tons loaded.
Each car.
Each rail.
And then
car.
you can put. What's the longest one you've ever?
So we were talking about this the other day. We used to run trains back in what I call the heyday in Detroit. We used to run trains sometimes upwards of 14,000 feet between Detroit and Flat Rock, Michigan. It was only about 30 miles. But
14,000 feet.
14,000 feet. So a pretty much 3 mile long train, 2 locomotives or 3 locomotives on the head end. So you're really only talking 12,000 horsepower. And your train would be 14,000 tons on that 14,000 feet. You can have shorter trains that weigh more. We were running coal trains to Detroit Edison, 130 cars and 22,000 tons, but they were only 6,500 feet long. The economics of rail, if you're talking about outside of a radius of 500 miles, the economics of moving freight by rail is infinitely more efficient and infinitely more from a safety, from a CO2 emissions standpoint, and from a cost economic standpoint, more effective than truck overall.
Well, that's one of the reasons it's getting me so interested in rail is one of our big hazards in the concrete industry is other drivers. Because I have no control over them. They're everywhere. They're making stupid decisions. They're doing this. On rail, nobody's cutting me off, right? The only issue could be if somebody tries to skirt around and sit on the tracks.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I tell
a lot
people,
less risk for on the transportation side.
Infinitely more risk, right? I mean, there's an order of magnitude. I mean, there are statistics that show that rail is 75% safer than trucking mode of transportation necessarily. But I always tell people, rail cars only go where the rails take them, and if they don't, then you got a big problem.
Then you got
right.
Yeah, you can't just make a right turn.
No, then there's no steering wheel in a locomotive, and you don't drive a train, you run them.
Oh, there you go. That's good.
Yep.
How did you end up at Ozinga?
I'd been fortunate to have a lot of very strong mentors in the industry on the rail side, who were very instrumental in helping me be successful at Canadian National in terms of growth in the company. Being able to see a lot of aspects of the company, rotate through some really great assignments in mid-level management. And then I had the opportunity to help start a waste-by-rail transload operation in eastern Kentucky. That's where I went away from the carrier side of rail operations and into the customer side. And our direct serving railroad was CSX at the time down in eastern Kentucky. And I did that for a couple of years, but really had the itch to go go back into the true carrier side and railroading. And so I had an opportunity to join Patriot Rail in 2016, worked for them for for 8 years, almost 8 years. And then fortunate for me, a colleague of mine is already in Ozinga, and as our chief financial officer, and he'd been bugging me for 2-3 years. Like, hey, we don't have a rail person. We really need a rail person.
Yeah.
We need somebody who understands this. And so finally, he kind of got me to jump the ship. And the timing was good, Adam, because when I went over to Patriot Rail, the CEO that we had there was the CEO that we had through that entire 8-year tenure, and he had announced his retirement. And so it kind of gave me the opportunity to say, okay, I feel comfortable being a free agent, because if there's nothing else about me, it's that I've got a ton of integrity and I'm very loyal, right? So I don't typically want to make adjustments or changes. In a career, I really get a lot of value and enjoyment out of helping a company succeed. But this gave me an opportunity to kind of reshuffle the deck, and so I went back to our who is now our CFO there, Mr. Joel Zanstra, and I said, hey, I'd like to take you up on that offer if it's still out there. So he got me an introduction to Marty Ozinga. He got to talking to him in the summer of 2024, and we kind of mutually talked about, the value that rail is going to bring to the company, and how we're on a very unique event horizon with everything we're doing here at Ozinga, and how we're really going to lean into rail. And therefore, we need somebody who has that expertise. So it just felt like a really good alignment, besides the culture, which is phenomenal anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just very well aligned with what I was looking for my next challenge.
Well, I think what is most interesting when we first started talking was how interested and how specific you were with safety.
Oh, yeah.
On the rail. And because it's not a lot of little fender benders if there's an incident with rail.
No,
so
right.
the rail industry has to be so specific on and strict on their safety program, which we'll sort of get into a little bit. But before we do that, give me a couple of rail terms that make me feel cool here.
Oh, yeah.
There's a couple that you were telling me earlier that came up from the rail industry that we use every day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I tell people this. So you talk about the railroad being almost 200 years old, and really in a lot of aspects, the railroads built America, right? Because railroads would go out to specific towns, and the towns would build up around the railroad. And why would that happen? Well, it would happen because the railroad brought the people and the goods into that particular town, so there was density around the railroad, and that's how a lot of this came to pass. But through that period of time, railroad lingo has kind of meshed itself into Americana and become part of the culture, right? So we were talking the other day, if you ever heard the term on the wrong side of the tracks, right? You come from the wrong side of the tracks.
Yeah.
Well, every town has a prevailing wind, right? So when the railroad industry was using steam locomotives that obviously were burning coal for boilers, and then would exhaust the soot from that through their stacks, right? The wind would predominantly blow that soot and ash onto one side of the tracks or not. And that, believe it or not, wherever side you were opposite of the prevailing wind, a lot of times that was lower income businesses and housing and stuff, because people always had soot on their homes and, in their backyards and on their automobiles and stuff like that. So that's where the term you come from the wrong side of the tracks came from.
That's wild.
I know. Then you have,
I never knew that.
Yeah, the other one we were talking about is highball, right? You hear people talk about highball glasses and stuff like that. And highball was an early manual way of people communicating opposing railroad traffic. So two railroads crossing at grade, what's called a diamond, typically. You'd have an operator in a little shed or bungalow, and their responsibility was to simply, on a glorified flagpole, raise a big orange ball up in one direction of the flagpole, and that would give the indication off in the distance to the train crew that they had the route, the safe route to go through that railroad crossing at grade. It was called, they say we've got the highball, so take off, right? We were talking about switching terms, a Dutch drop, right?
The old Dutch drop.
The old Dutch drop,
we're a Dutch company, so
I know.
Go on. I want to hear what the Dutch drop is.
Yeah, it's hard to visualize if you can't draw it on a whiteboard. But the easiest way to explain a Dutch drop is that if you envision a locomotive with a rail car behind it, and you have to get that rail car into an industrial track where you can't shove the car down to rest, cut the locomotive off, and come back out. What you would have to do in the older days, there are some locations you can still do this, but most locations you can't, is you accelerate the locomotive and the rail car together, and you position an individual on the footboard of the locomotive to essentially uncouple the rail car at a speed of 5-8 miles an hour. And once the uncoupling has taken place, the locomotive accelerates out of the way, and a switchman on the ground lines a switch.
Switches the tracks.
Switches
right?
the track over, yep. And then that rail car drifts
brakes off.
Yep. Down into, no air brakes on the car. Somebody riding the car rides the car's handbrake down to the industry and sets the car.
So this locomotive speeds up, it detaches.
Yep.
He goes off to the side. The guy on the ground flips a switch, and this thing branches off. All while the guy's riding this.
Yep. Yeah.
And then applies this big wheel, this handbrake, right,
Yep.
to slow it down.
Yep. And bring it to a stop. And then sometimes the
Can you still
locomotive.
do that?
Some locations you can do it because there are some locations, and it's very rare on the railroad these days, but there are some locations where you cannot physically get a locomotive on the other side of a rail car. You need to have a passing siding that allows a locomotive to enter the siding, and then you pull the rail car around it, and you get on the other end of it, and you go. There are locations where you don't have that. And again, if rails only take you where the rail cars only go where the rails will take you,
right.
In some instances you have no choice. So there are locations where that still takes place. But a lot of instances, way back, I mean, you're talking 45 years ago, 50 years ago, they would do this all day long, right? Because switch crews, it was a faster way of doing things, because now you don't have to go all the way out to a siding that could be 15 miles away and come all the way back the other direction just
Right.
to put one car in an industry. You could execute a Dutch drop, get the car down in there, and you can keep going.
What's the weirdest thing you've seen shipped?
Oh, I've seen a few that are interesting. Fish oil is probably
Just
one
a
of the.
tank of fish oil?
It's a rail tank car, 23,000 gallons of fish oil. That's
I bet
probably-
that smelled great.
in the summer, yeah, in August, yeah, doesn't smell all that great when it's leaked down the side of it. You know, after they've loaded it, and then animal tallow is probably the other one. Lard,
Really?
right? Yeah, it's got a real interesting consistency, and
Well, especially in the summer, it's probably a liquid. If you do it in the winter, maybe more of a...
it's congealed, right? Same with palm oil. Palm oil is a really strange one. Palm oil, a lot of people don't realize you put on your popcorn, right? You get a microwave bag of popcorn that comes with a little, liquid on the that you can spread across as palm oil. You should see what happens when it settles out in a rail car.
Exactly.
It looks like peanut butter. It's not not exactly the greatest. So,
Well, I'd like to get into the safety side of this. So as a, in operations for a train company, were you in charge of like accident investigations?
Yeah.
Have you seen some bad stuff?
yeah, I have. I mean, unfortunately, the rail industry is coming off a long way. I will say that. I'd start off by saying it's staggering that in 1980, you and I were talking about this, in 1980, there were 100 railroad employee fatalities.
Employee fatalities.
Employee fatalities.
Okay.
1980. So that's essentially on a 52-week year, you're killing 2 people a week.
Jeez.
In 2025, the industry as a whole finished with 6. Massive
Jeez.
improvement. Yeah, massive improvement. You touched on this earlier. The fundamental way a train moves, other than a few things that have evolved from a technology standpoint, is still the same as it was almost 200 years ago. But even as recent as modern 1980s, we were killing 100 people a year. And in 2025, we killed 6. Now, that's 6 too many, right?
Yeah, right.
But unfortunately, across my nearly 20-year career, I've seen some really gruesome stuff, unfortunately, right? And I've been fortunate enough to where the majority of what I've seen has been incidents involving trespassers, whether they're vehicular trespassers that are running around crossing gates and getting hit by trains, pedestrian trespassers that are getting on tracks and get hit and run over by trains.
Jeez.
I tell people that stuff sticks with you. I have been secondary to incidents that have taken place that have caused double amputations of employees. I've been secondary to incidents where a hand has been crushed, right? And what I tell people is this stuff's unforgiving. Rail equipment is unforgiving. An empty car weighs 25 tons, right? A loaded rail car weighs close to 130. That piece of equipment moves on the surface area of a dime on 8 wheels. When you see
Say that again?
So that equipment, so one rail car, the 8 wheels that rail car, as it sits on the ball of a rail, each one of those wheels sitting on that ball of a rail represents the surface area of a dime.
Jeez.
So the coefficient of friction to move that rail car is not what you would think. It's like, have you ever seen these strongman competitions where somebody pulls a rail car?
Yeah.
You or I could probably do that.
Yeah, well, of course.
Yeah. I mean, look at us, right? Yeah. But I tell people that the equipment doesn't care if you got a wife at home, right? the equipment doesn't care if you just got back from your honeymoon. The equipment doesn't care if you got 4 kids. The equipment doesn't care if you collect Harley Davidson motorcycles. It'll still run you over, and it'll cause the exact same result, which is it changes the fundamental trajectory of people's lives, directly and indirectly, right? I mean, I've been as a first responder from the railroad industry, working at night in incidents and things like that are absolutely horrific, and you see the collateral damage from a human element that your first responders have to deal with, that victim has to deal with, that victim's spouse has to get a phone call, that you have to report in, what the incidents are. I mean, and I've seen some brutal ones, Adam. I've seen, automobiles hit the sides of trains at 55 miles an hour because the individual was intoxicated and
didn't see the train. And once you get a coating of snow on the ground, you get 2-3 inches of snow on the ground, the equipment is dead silent, because a lot of people maybe some people realize that snow is an insulator of sound, right? So if you get as little as 5-6 inches of snow on the ground, that'll be up at the ball of the rail, and you won't hear equipment moving down that track. And we had an individual who was the head of safety at Canadian National, used to teach a training class. He's retired now, great guy, but he used to tell a story of his early days at the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton Railroad in Flat Rock, Michigan, walking tracks at night in wintertime. And the way that the yard lights would cast shadows, he had a hard time seeing the rail car numbers. So he decided one night while walking a track, the adjacent track next to him was clear. There was no cars in it. And he realized that if he walked in the middle of that track, he could better see the rail car numbers of the cars he was marking down from a clerical standpoint. And he said that as he was walking, he thought he had heard something, so he looked behind him really quick and he didn't see anything. So he continued walking another 50 feet, let's say, heard the sound again, looked behind him, didn't see anything. And so he got to the next rail car, couldn't read the rail car number very well. So he stepped out of the middle of the tracks to go closer to the rail car to get the number. And as he stepped out, a rail car, an empty frame flat car that he couldn't see because of the way the shadows were casting at an angle, brushed by his back and rolled silently past him. And he said, that little creaking sound I heard was this car moving at 2-3 miles an hour, just creeping down this track. But I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't hear the wheels. I couldn't on the flangeways because there was, 8 inches of snow on the ground. Jeez.
Almost ran me over. How you approach a safety program on the railroad is not too unlike another safety program in any other industry. It's a behavior-based program that you want to have, right? So this is one of the key fundamental issues here is that you want to try to correct behaviors. Well, what happened here? Well, this individual felt like, I know it's a risk, right? I'm walking in the middle of a railroad track, but I can get my job done a little faster or effectively if I do this. So I'm going to go ahead and take the risk because I've calculated it in my head that it should be okay because I don't hear anything and I don't see anything, so I should be fine, right? Yeah. I tell people that I don't care. I've been in this industry almost 20 years. Anytime I get to the point where I'm standing near to a railroad track, I get anxious.
Right.
Because
you've seen so many bad things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think people, like you're saying, people's behaviors a lot of times are based off of their perception of risk. Especially if they don't have a lot of experience in rail, their perception of risk is like, I'm going to be able to hear this huge thing coming behind me, or they're not going to hit me because they know I'm here. It's like if you've seen all the bad things, like maybe you've been doing it for how long and you're anxious when you stand out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a healthy respect. Right. So you're absolutely right. A lot of people that have been in vehicular accidents where they've been hit by trains, if you really get down to talking to them, they'll say, well, it didn't look like the train was coming that fast towards the crossing. Because a lot of people don't recognize that the size of the equipment makes it look as though it's not moving as fast as it actually is. If we went out right now and looked at a train going by our building here, and I gave you an estimate as to how fast you thought that train was going, you'd be wrong by a massive magnitude, probably over 50% inaccurate on what the speed is actually out there.
How fast do they normally go?
Out here, if you're talking outside the building here, I mean, the Metro Scoots will run 50 miles an hour. You get out west, and they've got train speeds over 70 miles an hour running on intermodal trains. And a lot of people don't also realize that when you stand that close to equipment that's displacing air like that, it can create a vacuum scenario that actually pulls you towards the equipment itself.
Really?
Because of the way it displaces, air as it's traveling. This is early on. I don't know if they do it anymore necessarily, but they taught you that if you ever are walking in between a set of tracks in a rail yard or on a siding and a main, and equipment is moving by you in opposite directions, it disorients you very quickly, and they tell you to go down to your knees, if not lay flat on the ground, to avoid accidentally stumbling into moving equipment because of how disoriented you are by the equipment moving. It can be scary. Everybody talks about how the railroad rule books were written in blood, and there's a lot of truth to that. Like, nobody had rules about, riding on the footboard of a locomotive until too many people fell off them and got run over.
Yeah.
Right? And then it was, now you can't ride the footboard of a locomotive. Why you can't initiate a cut lever with your foot, right? Why you can't kick a coupler as you're making a coupling.
I don't know what hardly any of that means.
Yeah, I mean,
but I get what you're saying. It's specific rules.
Yeah, and it's
because
scary.
People get hurt.
And people get hurt. So I tell people, like, you really have to understand the application of the rules, right? Because you may be going up to somebody who has had a at-risk behavior for ever in their 35-year career, and you're going to have to go with conviction to that individual and explain to them what they're doing wrong and why they're doing it wrong and how they should be doing it conversely, right? To be able to take them out of a risk scenario necessarily, right? There's stories all about folks that have done things thousands of times, and then the one time something changed,
right?
And that was the point at which they got injured.
All the time.
It's scary. And there was actually a guy that I worked for who had an injury where an employee lost his foot by having the two rail cars coming together to couple, and the individual tried to kick the one coupler into a position so that they could make a perfect coupling. Right? And the employee went to kick the face of the coupler and missed, and his foot passed right between the two as the coupling came together and crushed his foot. And so he was a young guy in his early 20s, and he was working a job in an industry that had a condition that where the rail cars in one particular location always missed their coupling, and frequently over the course of the night, dozens of times they would have to make these adjustments, and it was taking an awful long time. So that particular employee figured out that, well, what I can do is while the coupling's coming in to make, if I see it's not going to make, I'm going to kick the one coupler over and it'll make. And then I won't have to separate the rail cars 3 or 4 different times, and it'll save me a bunch of time. So the employee got his foot crushed. He was in the hospital recovering, and my boss, who was in another role at the time, went in and asked the individual, how many times do you think you've done that? Mm-hmm. And he said, the employee said to him, as serious as a heart attack, do you have a calculator? And shockingly, the guy gave him his phone, calculated, and he said, here's the number. And it was like well over 5,000 or 6,000 times.
Yeah.
And one time he misses, and now he can't walk like you and I can walk for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting.
They stick with you.
I mean, I've seen that in every industry I've been in too. And it's frustrating to hear sometimes, but a lot of we call them old timers, but they're saying, I've been doing it this way for 30 years and until it doesn't work.
Yep.
And that's what we try to prevent.
Yeah.
I'm curious, up until 1980, is that what, the industry's so old. There's probably 200 years of bad habits.
Absolutely.
Or behaviors that they learned from 5 generations before them.
Yeah.
Because they didn't know about safety back then, or it didn't matter.
It's a little bit of both. The railroads up until 1980 were regulated by the federal government. So their pricing was regulated, which meant that if a rail customer wanted service from the railroads had to provide that service at a certain cost per car, regardless if the railroads made any money on that or not. So what ended up happening? Railroads said, well, geez, I can't, we're pushing into the verge of bankruptcy. As a nationwide rail industry, we're pushing into bankruptcy because I can't afford to pay for all this training. I can't afford to get good quality people. I can't afford to have these people out there enforcing compliance to guarantee things to be safe, right? Well, the Renaissance of the post-Staggers Act in 1980 that deregulated the railroads gave railroads now the ability to shed a lot of light density rail lines where they weren't making money. Entrepreneurial folks came in and gobbled those up, started running them as their own companies. The railroads were able to then consolidate their footprint and begin to invest in people, including safe practices. But
that wasn't until 1980?
Yeah, 1980 was when the railroads were deregulated.
I guess the OSHA Act was in the 70s, so not that much later.
No, it wasn't. And even you talk about the culture on the railroads in through the 60s and 70s. I mean, a lot of substance abuse, people working long hours.
Really?
I went to a terminal one time where talking to an old head who'd been there 38 years, and he said, back in the early 1970s, there was a flask of alcohol under every one of these switch stands. And the rule that we had is if you were the one that took the last swig, you were required at the next break to go replenish it. Oh, man.
Really?
Yeah. I mean,
I've heard a number of those stories too. It was in construction.
Yeah.
It's like, they used to have, they'd be finishing concrete. This is way before I started. But, the older finishers would, we used to have, we'd have a little piece for our trowel and then a little thing that we set on the wet concrete that we could set your beer on. And you just move that and move this, and then you trowel and then move it. Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You guys would talk about working on work trains on cabooses and stuff like that, and they'd fill the ice boxes up, and they didn't want to get in trouble, so they would, they would coat the whole bottom of the ice box with beer, and then they'd put all the ice over the top of it so you couldn't see it. And then they'd put their food and everything like that out there. And so if they ever had a supervisor come out or something like that, they open the cooler up. Oh, all you got is your sandwiches and stuff. Okay, you're good. In the meantime, they've got, 4 24-packs sitting down there. Those days are gone. Thank God.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned a lot from you about the rail, but I think it's important for anybody listening to hear, what are some of the most dangerous parts of the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I would say that our industry in the rail side is not too unlike a lot of the other industries where you're interacting with physical assets. So the number one cause of injuries is slip, trips, and falls on the rail industry. Probably not surprising, right?
Yeah.
You're out walking along a ballast line. You're in all weather conditions, all times of the year, nights, weekends, holidays, all that type of stuff. So the thing I tell people that is probably some of the most safety sensitive areas of railroading are protecting rail shove movements or reverse movements. Okay.
Shoving, so pushing
rail cars, right? So it's one thing, you've got a locomotive or a rail car moving device on one end, right? That's usually a manned device. Well, that's easy to be able to see what's going on because you have somebody that's got a visual of the movement when they are moving ahead. However, when you're moving backwards, you have to rely on somebody at that movement who is protecting that movement backwards because think about it, on a 14,000 foot long train, there are times you're going to have to shove 5,000 foot of train into a track.
Jeez.
That's a mile of track where the locomotive engineer is at one end and he's only simply relying on the instructions of the groundman.
The guy in the front.
Yeah, at the very back, right?
The back, yeah.
Protecting the move. So shove movement's extremely critical. Getting on and off equipment. Same thing, right? In the concrete industry, we have big pieces of equipment, bulkers, ready mix trucks, yellow iron. You want to maintain 3 points of contact, right? That's critical on the rail side too. Handling of switches and derails, okay? So switches is moving a rail car from one track to another track. A derail is actually a positive safety device that's used to prevent a rail car from entering into a location where employees are working.
Right, so if we got an area where people are working or other, we have to set this, what we call a derail up.
Positive protection, correct.
And that will actually derail the train.
It will derail a car.
That's why they call it that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly right. Yeah.
Which is better than hitting a person.
Correct, yeah. Because if you have employees, let's say, that are under a rail car working on opening a gate to hook up a chute to unload, in our case, powdered cement, let's say, that employee is not going to be able to see what's going on 5 rail cars up ahead of them, because that's 300 feet. They don't know what's going on, right? So they would never be aware that a rail car had gotten onto the track that they're working on. And all it takes is that instance of those rail cars impacting and shifting the whole cut of cars, and that employee falls, and before you know it, they've been injured or there's a fatality because of that, right? So that's why handling of that equipment, switches and derails, positive protection for workers, fouling equipment. Those are probably some of the most critical elements of rail safety.
So communication is important.
Massively important. Yeah. I mean,
But how'd they communicate back in the 1800s?
oh yeah. So that is, again, we could do a whole podcast on it. It's its own sign language pretty much, right? So the railroad
Really?
industry, oh, absolutely. So back before you had radio communications, now the radio communications themselves are only as recent as like the 1950s, late 1950s roughly. So before that, and even well into the 50s, the equipment that was equipped with radios was primarily locomotives, right? So you really didn't have the handheld walkie-talkie, two-way radios or lapel mics and things like that to be able to communicate on the ground. So railroads developed, employees developed all of their own language,
Really?
right? Yeah, so they'd take kerosene lanterns and they'd use just big arm movements, right? Big swinging movement up and down is ahead. A big movement in a circle is back up. A big movement swinging at your knees is slow down and stop. Right? So they, but that
lantern.
A lantern, yeah, yeah.
It's really creative, actually.
Well, it's creative, and then these guys would have a language all their own in the rail yards too. You'd have 4 or 5 groundmen. So again, think of a location where you have, let's say, 60 rail cars on your train, and you have to move those rail cars and spread them out across 10 different tracks in a rail yard because they're going to different destinations. Well, again, if you're taking an average rail car length of 50 feet, 60 cars is 3,000 feet long, is 3/4 of a mile long. The locomotive engineer, if he doesn't have radio communication, how is he going to be able to understand what the people on the ground need him to do?
Yeah.
Well, they'd set up a glorified, the old thing we used to play as a kid, telephone, right? So
Yeah.
they would spread out
Whisper down the alley.
Whisper down the alley, right? So they would spread out 4 people down the lead so that the very last individual was closest to the locomotive engineer, and they would relay hand signals. And they'd have all sorts of, this is 10, that's 12, I'm going to take 12 cars, and I'm going to put the head 2 over to track 3, right? And they would just relay hand signals back and forth. And
That's wild.
Yeah.
Because, we do that in a lot of our, safety training, culture training, because we talk about communication. And
Yeah.
we do, whisper down the alley. It's like the first person has a silly term.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets to the 10th person, and it's completely different.
almost all
But
the time.
these guys have no room for error.
None.
Yeah. They're seeing this guy, I can't remember what he said, but it's like 2 cars. It's like, whoa, that's a big difference.
Yeah, and to that point, Adam, it's how the industry has evolved from a technology. So you can think of how many incidents they had about equipment moving into a wrong track, right, and causing an injury or an accident or, heaven forbid, a fatality. Radios change a lot of that. Right?
Yeah.
But then you say, okay, well, what happens in an instance where there's too much radio chatter? Then what do you do, right? Well, then you have to be able to communicate, okay, we're going to go to hand signals, right? And so the railroad, even today, in major rail yards, they still have the implementation of hand signals, right? And so there's still a basic set of 6 or a dozen hand signals that you and I can have a job briefing, and we can say, hey, look, I can't hardly hear you. You keep getting walked on by the other radio chatter in the yard. We're going to go to hand signals, right?
Really?
And then you can go back to the old days of waving your arm up and down and in a circle.
With a
and-
lantern?
Yeah, with a lantern. the whole
Kerosene
nine.
lantern still? Do they still use those?
No, they use battery powered ones, but it's really unique when you look at every aspect of the the railroad side is all the lanterns that the employees carry are all bright colors, right? They're either fluorescent green, fluorescent orange, fluorescent yellow, and the reason being is because they want it to stand out. In the instance that you have to take hand signals, it stands out amongst other action that's being done in that particular rail yard, right? So the equipment is deceptive, the speed of the equipment, the size of the equipment, incredibly deceptive. So you have to have that situational awareness at all times.
Let's say I'm a company who has a little bit of rail, or if I'm somebody trying to get into the rail industry a little bit, obviously we got to start with safety, right?
Yeah.
So from your perspective, where do you even start?
Yeah, I think you have to start with understanding that there's resources out there to be able to go out and identify, right? Okay, I know that there's got to be a safety program out here that can help me understand the railroad jargon and the critical elements of moving rail cars, or just working around the equipment, right? And so I think you have to start with that. Is you have to go in, you have to take a look at that and say, okay, I'm pretty comfortable I can find some research. And you want to hone in on some of the key focus elements that we talked about, right? Moving equipment left in the foul, crossing tracks safely, all that sort of stuff. And I think, so it starts with the awareness. Hey, I need something, right? I need to be able to protect my employees positively. And then I think what you do is you build off of that, right? And you have discussions with your employees that are interacting with rail cars. In a lot of ways, they can tell you what some of the conditions are that are out there that need to be protected against. And then you can observe those conditions and understand how they're behaving around them, right? And then from there, you start building a program that really understands how the equipment operates and what happens when it doesn't operate the way that it's supposed to, and how you interface with that stuff. But I really think what it circles into eventually, Adam, is you take that tangible element, right? Those rules and procedures that you develop, that you find out there. You can go out and find, if you want to, online, you can find the general code of operating rules for railroads. And you can simply select things out of there that are intuitive. They have pictograms, they have descriptions, they have videos you can watch, and you can take the aspects of G-Core and you can put that out and develop your program around that. So you got to have a compliance component of that. You need to be able to train your managers and your people to understand, to identify the risk that's out there, the behaviors versus the conditions and things. And then start a flywheel of just culture where you're coaching, you're correcting, you're training, and then you're implementing new processes, right? And then once that continuous improvement flywheel really starts rolling around, well, then the employees begin to own the program overall. But awareness is always where you need to start. You got to identify it's a risk, and how do I work to mitigate that risk, and what resources are around there to help me do that.
So you said in the 80s is when the government stopped regulating it, right? So these private companies could start putting some money and some energy into it. I think that's an interesting point of this whole thing is you're going to have to invest some time and money into safety. And first of all, okay, let's draw procedures, policies, all that. That's one thing. But you really got to train to it, but you got to lead people too.
Yes, you do. Absolutely.
That's the biggest part of this whole thing.
Yeah, I think there's several things that I found to really resonate in my career when it's come to safety. Because again, unfortunately, I've had to see some stuff that is most people should not have to see, right? But from that, what you have to take away from it is, now that I've seen this stuff and I've seen the catastrophe that it causes from a human aspect and an equipment aspect and a liability aspect, how do you take those elements and then create something good out of it necessarily? So you do. I tell people, and there's a couple of buzzwords I've always used with groups to kind of snap them into focus is, safety is something that you pay into every single day to collect the dividend down the road, right? So you're paying into something. So I'm going to pay in today. I'm going to, I know that it would be faster if I did this. However, it puts me at risk. Therefore, I'm going to choose the behavior that keeps me the most safe. Well, now that's you taking envision an investment and you're putting $1 into that safety bucket, right? And then someday you're going to be able to collect that dividend of ending your career in a condition that you came into your career in, right? The other thing I tell people too about the safety is just remember, safety is something that you work every day to do, that you expect something not to happen as a desired outcome, right? So you or I come to work every day and you write a new procedure because you implement that and you want that to go out into the field, right? So you work to put something together to put it out at the end of the day, right? Whereas with safety, you work all day for something not to happen.
Right.
and
it's tough to measure that too.
Well, it's very tough to measure it necessarily, right? But it's important to understand it. And so I think if you get together a group of folks and you say, hey, we are really going to shoulder in on this and we're going to lean in and we're going to really help understand where our risk is, and we are going to be proactive about doing the right things to mitigate that risk. That if you start with that and people lead with integrity and a moral compass and they want to do the right type of thing because they know that it's right for the individuals themselves, you're going to develop a program naturally that people are going to embrace and want to call their own, right? And that's so critical on the rail side overall because it's what we started with, right? This stuff is unforgiving.
Yeah.
And if you don't treat it with the respect, you're in trouble.
We call that the why.
It is the why.
You got to know why. And you've seen enough bad things happen that as much as we can communicate that to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been great. I'm sure we could go 20 different routes here with not like a rail route.
I like that too. We could go to, I like that.
I've really appreciated this.
Good.
I love your leadership, at least especially on the safety side. I've learned so much from you on the rail side, but from the safety side, you've been a huge help. So if anybody else needs some help, it's definitely, I'm sure we could reach out to you. And
Absolutely. Happy to be a resource. I tell people all the time that for me, what's most critical is the evolution of the industry in a way that positively impacts people. And it's one of we talk about here, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I've always wanted to steward and help steward others, the younger people in the industry. And how do I develop myself better, right? I mean, it can be safety, but it can be other aspects as well. So absolutely, if anybody ever had any questions, hey, I don't really understand how you'd protect accurately against something like this. I love those types of challenges because there hasn't been anything I've found from rail safety aspect in my almost 20 years that can't be solved for effectively and mitigate the risk and therefore send people home safely, which is the goal at the end of the day.
I love it. Well, thank you again, James. It's been great talking to you.
Likewise.
I'll see you soon.
You got it. Appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
You bet.
Be sure to subscribe to Chasing Zero wherever you get podcasts, and find full video of this conversation by searching Chasing Zero on YouTube. For company updates and social media, visit us at ozinga.com.